And some of that seems all right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Carpenka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of ViCLAS Hall Pass, Facing the Buried Trauma of Sexual Assault by Karin Martel. Thank you to Karin for being here tonight, and thank you to Signature Editions for helping us bring you this event. I'd also like to thank our special guest for the evening, Marina Endicott, who will join Karin in conversation. Marina is the author of Good to a Fault, which won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best Book, Canada and the Caribbean, and was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. The Little Shadows, which was longlisted for the Giller and shortlisted for the Governor General's Literary Award. Close to Hugh, which was longlisted for the Giller, and The Difference, which won the Robert Craich City of Edmonton Book Prize in 2020. She has been an actor, director, playwright, and editor, and she lives in Saskatoon. Her new book, The Observer, comes out this fall. I'll now turn it over to Marina to introduce Karin. Please give them both a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Come on in and sit down. It's pretty casual in here. It seems funny to try and introduce Karin to all of you people because I think you probably know her as well as I do, but I know her pretty well. I knew her when she first came. Transplanted to Canada from Michigan, Karin Martel has lived for 30 years in Saskatoon with her husband, Jeff, who's one of my husband, Peter's oldest friends. And that's how I came to know Karin. I remember when Jeff arrived with her as a kind of a Miss Congeniality prize from a writer's retreat. We were all pretty chuffed. We thought this was a good thing. And in that January, we came back to go to Karin and Jeff's wedding here in Saskatoon. Was it in Edmonton? Right, because it was, that's right. Oh my gosh. It just must have been so strange to come from Michigan to the land of true winter, though, and realize what you got yourself into.
It was -40 or whatever.
Yeah. And that's not the only day that it was minus.
It was not the only day.
Here she is now in her own community, with her Saskatoon family, with so many friends coming to celebrate her achievement in writing this book, ViCLAS Hall Pass. I don't know how many of you read it, but I can tell you it's a fantastic book. Karin is now a special constable with the Saskatoon Police Service, where she worked for 13 years as a 911 operator, police call taker, and police dispatcher. She's now the SPS ViCLAS Coordinator, a position which requires her to read and document every sexual assault reported to the Saskatoon Police. Fun times. But that crucial and stressful work by a roundabout path actually led to this book. After two particularly disturbing calls that continued to haunt Karin, she went to see a therapist finally. Good idea. I've asked Karin to begin with a reading to set the book into our minds from that original push towards therapy after all the despair, stress work, and then what happened when she went. Surprise! Surprise!
Okay, so let's go start at the beginning of the book. I met my, just to set it up. I met my therapist for bail. I don't think I need to be there, but I'm obviously showing signs that I should, giving the reader indications that I should. So I made this appointment because for the last month or so, I felt like I was coming down with something. I would wake up with a sore throat, but it never turned into a cold. I ached all over. I was lethargic and had trouble concentrating. I really fell off my game at work. Like I just couldn't get it together. I had this constant tightness and heaviness in my chest. I'd had pneumonia 3 times before, so I thought it might be that, but I never developed any other symptoms. After a few weeks of this, I thought it might be because of work stress, so that's why I made the appointment with you. Belle adjusts her glasses and gently tilts her head to the side like a cat who hears a curious sound. But in the last 3 days, I've been feeling much better and almost canceled the appointment, but I kept it because there are a couple of calls from work that have been kind of bothering me. I thought you could help me make a plan to deal with them in future calls. Val raises her eyebrows in acknowledgement and writes a few more notes. And there's this other life event that's been on my mind, something that happened in high school. I add, life event? Val looks up sharply. I don't remember you mentioning a life event before. She riffles through her notes. Life event? Where did that phrase come from? It's more of a nothing event that doesn't have anything to do with how I've been feeling now, and not what I came here to talk about. If I tell her the story, I'm going to sound whiny, dramatic. What I really should talk about are the calls. Well, Val says, you're in the lead. You can start with either of the calls or this life event. I inwardly cringe when she says life event, but I'm impressed with how she says it so sincerely and without a trace of condescension. Still, there's no way I'm going to start with that. It's the calls that are important. I'll start with a life event. What am I doing? Val nods and waits for me to begin. I don't even have to begin. This is my therapy session. I'm in the lead. I can change my mind. But I've already started, so might as well get it over with. It's no big deal. I'll tell my story. Val is too professional to roll her eyes at my teenage drama. She'll be empathetic and validate it. We'll wrap it up into a nice little package and put it on the shelf. It'll take 5 minutes. Then we can move on to the important stuff. I lean a little forward in my seat. Okay, it happened when I was 14. I begin with a breezy tone of voice to match the triteness of the story. It was 9th grade. I was the only girl in the metal shop class. I think it started on the first day, but I can't be sure. We were all in a group standing near some of the machinery while the teacher was talking to us about safety or something, when this boy came up behind me and grabbed me in kind of a bear hug. As I was struggling and yelling at him to let me go, everyone, including the teacher, was looking at us. Then he started grabbing my breasts, my butt, and my crotch. Everyone was watching me, trying to get away from him, but no one did anything. He let me go when he was done with me. I've always remembered it as happening every day, but I can't be sure it did. I do know it happened a lot regularly. Sometimes he invited the other boys in to feel me up too. Sometimes they did. It happened in the hallway in between classes too. I begged the teacher to get the boy to stop, but the teacher never helped me. I lean back and try and act as normal as possible, hoping she doesn't notice I'm vibrating. I don't want her to think I'm a big baby who gets shook up telling a story about something that happened over 30 years ago. Val squares herself towards me, straightens her spine, and lowers her chin slightly. She's not smiling, she's not nodding. Instead, she's looking directly at me, making sure I'm looking at her, making sure I'm listening as she begins to list off words and phrases like violation, intrusion, violence, betrayal of trust. Part of me thinks Val is being overly dramatic and tries to hold back the tears welling up in my eyes. Another part of me lets some of the tears fall and says thank you over and over. I'm surprised at the relief I feel that she didn't dismiss my story out of hand, that even though it happened such a long time ago, it isn't relevant to my life now. It doesn't mean I'm foolish for bringing it up. She finishes listing adjectives, and we sit in silence for a moment while I wait for her to ask me about the work calls. Instead, she swivels towards her bookshelf, picks out a large, well-worn paperback. Do you find that you're overly alert for danger? What? For instance, when you go somewhere, even here, it doesn't matter where you decide to sit. Some people feel safer if they can see the door and have an easy way out of the room. I think about where I'm sitting on the end of the couch, immediately opposite the door, nothing in my way. Val is off to the right in front of me. I feel I can make it to the door before she does if I get a fraction of a head start. It also allows me to keep an eye on it in case anyone tries to enter. I nod. Do you ever feel spaced out? I must look confused again because she gives an example. Like you feel not present or cut off. Some people may feel clumsy or walk into walls or furniture because of it. I still don't know why she's asking me these questions, but I know exactly what she means. Yeah, I feel spaced out a lot. Most of the time I feel like I'm up here and my body is on autopilot. The effect of it is that the majority of my life feels like I've been driving after a night shift, and after I'm parked at home, I can't remember how I got there. But what does this have to do with anything? What's going on? Why is she asking me this stuff? I'm sorry, what does this have to do with anything? Well, these are questions from this book. She shows me the book's cover. It's titled The Courage to Heal, a guide for women survivors of child sexual abuse. Well, now I'm really lost because I wasn't sexually abused, much less sexually abused as a child. I start to shake my head. Dale's got this all wrong. No, that's not me. It never bothered me. It doesn't have anything to do with that stuff. Karin, Dale presses her lips together into a great line and leans towards me. When you were telling me about what happened, I noticed a few things. I could tell that your heart rate increased and your mouth went dry. Are you sweating? I nod. I've also noticed that you're a shallow breather. Does that sound right? Well, yeah, I mean, I can take a deep breath, but when I do, it feels like there's a belt tightening around my rib cage. These symptoms that you have, sweating, dry mouth, and increasing heart rate, are all associated with the threat response. When we are threatened, our fear center in our amygdala is activated. When our amygdala is activated, we have a biological response that prepares us to fight, flee, or freeze. I nod, letting her know I understand the principle of what she's saying, but still not seeing what this has to do with anything. I was never physically hurt. I wasn't in a life or death situation. This threat response would have been triggered every time that boy grabbed you, and now when you tell the story, it's triggered again. And this happens over and over. You said it happened regularly. Then the amygdala can get sensitive and misinterpret some situations as being more dangerous. My head keeps bobbing politely while the rest of me waits for her to finish so I can tell her about the calls. When we start interpreting safe situations as being dangerous, we often unconsciously develop ways of coping by doing things we think will keep us safe. So the questions I'm asking you are helping me determine if and how much this has affected you. It hasn't affected me at all. My hands splay out, and how aren't you getting this motion? I don't know how to make myself any clearer. Okay. Val twists her face in thought like she's trying to work out how to explain the internet to an Amish grandmother. She flips through the pages of my file. In one of our sessions, you talked about your suicide attempt. Can you tell me when that was? I look up at the ceiling, trying to remember, either the summer after 9th or 10th grade. That makes sense. No, that didn't have anything to do with it. I shake my head again and again, attempt to wave up this whole line of reasoning, this whole conversation away with my hands. That had to do with me being bipolar. Val gives a little sigh and places the palms of her hands together and explains how there may be links between childhood trauma and bipolar disorder, how a person may have a predisposition to being bipolar, and then a traumatic incident can be a catalyst. Something inside me jolts to understanding. I grip my knees with my cold, sweaty hands and lean forward towards Val. Are you telling me the reason I'm bipolar is because of that? It's a risk factor and it could be a possibility, Val says. And just like that, the world drops out from under me, my stomach lurches into my throat, my heart jumps into a wild beat, and everything goes dark as I plummet into nothingness.
And
Okay.
you said once that this was one of the most challenging parts to write because you didn't even know how to convey how oblivious you were.
Yeah, and I actually think I did convey how oblivious I am. But I think that the real challenge was conveying how much this just knocked me off my axis. Because nothing had changed. Like, I had all the information, but I was just seeing it the wrong way. And I thought I had things figured out a certain way, but it was just, my perspective was all wrong, and I've been minimizing this thing, and that just, all these things I've been experiencing for the last 34 years was because of the actions of a stupid boy doing stupid things.
And I thought were stupid at the time and probably didn't take into real account at the time.
No, not at all. I mean, every message around me was that this is normal.
Just boys acting.
This is just what happens. Yeah.
You're gonna be in shop class.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. I like that.
Yeah, it's not good.
You talked about how shocking it was to make that connection. And then you say everything that happened to you in the last 34 years. So can you just tell us a couple of those things that were you diagnosed with bipolar early? When did you come to that understanding that turns out to have been a misunderstanding?
Yeah, so that was in my mid-20s. I noticed in my I noticed somewhere in my teenage years that something was wrong. My moods were out of whack. Just these highs and these lows. I didn't feel like I could regulate my emotions. And then, my suicide attempt, feelings, constant suicide, not constant, but regular thoughts of suicide when there's no other indication in my life that warranted those types of thoughts.
And when you should have been a happy girl.
I should have been, yeah. I mean, I really am a very blessed person. My life has every advantage, and yet I still felt like I was enduring life, like waking up wishing I had died in my sleep.
My 94-year-old mother says that to me every day when I call her. It didn't happen. I'm still here. And here you are as well.
Thank you.
I would like you to read to us again, because it's really lovely to hear you read it. It's memoir is just such a dangerous, scary thing to do. So it's hard for me to understand where you found the courage, having done this work, to be able to write it. But we'll talk about that later. But first, I'm hoping that you'll read to us from that 31. Well, we're so often hogtied by what we think we should feel or react. And we're so perplexed when we don't feel that way, when we don't feel the right way. And I think that's one of the really interesting things that you're getting out in the book is that we're puzzled and we don't know why we're not feeling the right way and why we're being like this.
So this is a few days later. Over the last 3 decades, I'd only thought a handful of times about what happened to me, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Over and over, I feel the boy grab me from behind. I hear his laugh. I see my classmates and my teacher staring at me. And over, my body responds with a jolt of adrenaline, my ribs squeezing the air out of my lungs, my heart trying to beat its way out of its cage. Sometimes the intrusive memories vary from the original event to the times he held me and invited the other boys in for a feel, to the times he ambushed me in the hallway by my locker in front of friends and anyone else walking by, to the quick little drive-bys that turned into an almost daily routine. It was like a dog pissing on a tree, marking his territory. Eventually, he didn't even need to restrain me because he trained the fight out of me, a self-serve grab and rope. Along with the memories come the whys. Why did I take that class? Why did I keep going back to it? Why didn't I tell anyone? Why didn't I know it mattered until now? Why did it take so long to realize? Along with the whys came the what ifs. What if I told someone other than the teacher? What if I quit the class? What if I fought harder? What if I'd never stopped fighting? What if I'd been smart enough to know what happened was wrong? And along with the whys and the what ifs comes a different struggle. How could something that didn't physically harm me do so much damage? Struggle. Do I deserve to feel this way? Struggle. I rack my brain with how many times it happened. I've always remembered it happening every day. Did it? Maybe shop class wasn't every day. Maybe it was just Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or maybe just Tuesdays and Thursdays. I try to cast my mind back to the projects we did. A chisel, a toolbox, a meat tenderizer. I can't think of any more. We wouldn't have had to go every day to finish those projects, would we? I do the calculations in my head. I try to remember how many school days were in a year. I do an internet search. My home state requires schools to be in session for 180 days. Something inside me slumps when I read that number. That's a lot of days to be in class with a boy. Schools are allowed to take 6 snow days per year and 2 days off for hunting season. Well, that would knock at least 8 days off, which means if class was 3 times a week, it could have happened only 100 times. If it was 2 days a week, then only 64 times. And if either of us stayed home sick, if he skipped class, if there were assemblies, then it would have happened even less. I cling to this line of thought and keep going over the numbers like a reverse auctioneer, driving the number down with each what if. What if it happened 40 times? How about 35? Do I hear 35, 30, 25? I did 25, 20. How long do I need to bid before I don't have to deal with the fallout with this feeling? Is 15 times more manageable? How about 10? Can I completely dismiss it at 5 or less and get on with my life? Why didn't Val ask me how many times? Isn't that important information? While I keep calling out bids, my shadow sits in the back row of the auction, arms crossed, hands jammed into her armpits, shaking her head with lips pressed in a grim line, murmuring, "It doesn't matter how many times it happened, it's the result that matters. And you know what the result is, you know how you feel." I can see my shadow has a point, so I pause the auction to see if she has anything else to say. My shadow stands up, points her bitter paddle at me, and begins listing off wood use. Would you be thinking this way if it happened to someone else? Would you try to minimize their experience? Would you tell them it was no big deal? Would you tell them they don't have a right to feel bad? Of course not. I slam the gavel down. Don't be ridiculous. How many times would it have to happen to them before you would allow them to feel bad about it? My shadow makes jabbing motions with the paddle to emphasize her words. I cross my arms, press my lips together and shake my head. Well, that's not fair. How many times? Once. What if this happened to Maddie or Max? How would you feel about it then? My shadow places her hands on her hips. Homicidal. So why can't you feel the same way for yourself? Because it's different. How? Because the person who did it was a classmate. He wasn't acting mean. He didn't call me names or say bad things to me. He was laughing and I wasn't hurt. No one did anything, so it couldn't have been a big deal. It couldn't have been that bad because I didn't tell anyone, because I never skipped class, because I didn't even try to transfer out of class, because it never seemed to bother me, because I don't remember thinking about it before or after class or at all, because I didn't even think about the boy, much less hate him or plan my revenge against him. Because if I thought or didn't think or do all of those things, then it didn't matter. My shadow sighs, considers, and says, would you allow any of those excuses if it happened to anyone else? If it happened to Maddie or Max? No. Then why do you allow those excuses for yourself? Because it's different for you. Why? It just is. My voice quivers, my shoulders fall as I let the gavel drop to the floor.
We're like talking. I remember when I first read the book, I was pretty scared to read it because we're good friends, and what if it wasn't any good? It happens more often than you might think, or maybe probably exactly as much as you might think. But instead, it was so good. It really shocked me how good it was, and how much it affected me to read this. This short trip between from not having any idea of this cause to your unlocking of that cause. And then I know that that was a short trip, but then the work to all the work that you had to do to try and heal all the myriad consequences of this action so long ago. That work that you had to do is really, I don't want to embarrass you, but it's really brave. So then so you did it. And I can see, I'm sure everybody who knows you can see the result of that work that you did. So what made you decide to write about it?
First, I just started writing because I wanted to start writing regularly. Whoops. And so, prevailing wisdom is just write what you know, and this is what I was thinking about. So I was writing it.
You're usually talking about like where you live.
Oh.
But okay.
I just misinterpret everything. And then as I came up with more material, I wondered if I actually could write the book that I really needed to read after that first meeting with Val. I'd minimized the experience so much, I felt like my reaction, I felt like the mental health issues I had were just way over the top for being groped in high school. Like I just didn't feel like those things lined up. So I wanted to read about, you know, the really non-newsworthy, everyday sort of, for lack of a better term, mundane sexual assaults, right? And there were a lot of books about sexual assault and trauma, but you know, every time I looked at the back cover, it was like, well, obviously they're traumatized. This was horrible, you know, no one would argue with this, but it wasn't anything about this. And I think there's, you know, so I wrote it with that in mind, because I think there's a lot of people like me. I think there's a lot of people who minimize this type of event in their, or, you know, this type of sexual assault in their life, and then are living with consequences of, you know, anxiety, depression, you know, suicidal ideation.
And all the worse for not knowing why.
And for not knowing why and thinking something is wrong with them instead of knowing something happens to them. That, you know, they're not weak, they're not whatever. This is just,
They just have to over.
yeah.
And the process of dealing with it is interesting in the book. It's one of the pleasures of the book really is to watch you do exercises, and you do read us one about the ridiculous exercise.
Yeah.
I'm trying to describe it that way to me. I know this exercise sounds ridiculous.
It does. So, other prevailing wisdom about writing is, you know, don't write about your dreams. So I absolutely wrote about my dreams.
Do you bullshit that advice?
Yeah,
Dreams are really interesting.
Okay, all right. My family's like, no, Mom, we do not want to hear about
Well,
your
just
dreams.
come
But
and tell me in the book,
okay,
because my family doesn't want to hear mine.
okay.
Idiots.
I've had a triad of recurring dreams since my teens. In the first dream, someone's chasing me, hunting me, catching me, holding me, beating me, choking me, stabbing me, drowning me. My legs try to run, but I can't feel them. My arms try to fight, but they're not there. My mouth opens to scream, but my throat is empty. I'm not in a room, I'm not outdoors, I'm not in a place. Surrounded by emptiness, falling into darkness, and I'm alone. Other than my attacker, I'm always alone. In the second dream, I chase, I catch, I hold, I fall down and bring them down with me. I punch, I beat, I choke, I stab, I survive by slaying. There's no in between, it's me or them. I'm murderous, a murderess. There's no backdrop, no context, no story, no scene, just struggle and fight, and still I'm alone. Other than my attacker, I'm always alone. In the third dream, the police are coming because they know about the body buried in the backyard, the body with its head cut off that I cut off. I have to get rid of it, but it's daylight. If I dig it up, someone will see. If I dig it up, it'll be too heavy for me to carry. It will fall apart from decay, body pieces everywhere. I won't be able to handle it. I won't be able to hide it. And I'm alone. I'm always alone. I wake up from all three dreams paralyzed with fear, my heart racing, my body drenched in sweat. It takes me many minutes before I can move, before I can finally realize what's real and what isn't. I've been thinking about these dreams because lately I've been reading some books about the effects of trauma. I read about the three involuntary reactions to danger: fight, flight, or freeze. As I'm reading about fight, flight, and freeze responses and thinking about my dreams, I start to see a connection. Dream number one seems to be my freeze response, and dream number two, my fight response. I'm not sure what dream number three is about, but it doesn't seem to be the flee response. I wonder why I don't have a flee response dream. And then I remember another recurring dream I've never connected with the others. It's a dream in which I'm desperately running away from high school, trying to get home, but instead of getting closer to home, I keep finding myself passing the same landmarks, back at the front door of the school, running up the same hill, and I can never seem to make it home. I have the same feeling of panic, frustration, and fear as I do in the other three. Maybe that's my flee response. I've never given much thought to the dreams. I know that nightmares are a symptom of trauma, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder, but I always assumed it meant that nightmares had to be a reliving of the actual event. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe my fight, flight, and freeze dreams are an attempt by my subconscious mind to deal with the unresolved trauma of ninth grade. It's been 2 weeks since I last saw Val. I'm no longer crying every day and I'm starting to get warned by the sudden flashbacks of the boy sneaking up behind me, seizing me in his arms, taking his hands, taking turns grabbing me. At the same time, shock waves of electricity burst in my heart and the vice-like grip of the python squeezes the air out of my lungs, while a wave of nausea and shame washes over me as I feel the eyes of my classmates and the teacher watching the boy violate me. I tell myself to stop thinking about it. Telling myself doesn't work. In a book I've been reading, Waking the Tiger, the author Dr. Levine describes how he guided 2 of his clients through an exercise in which they experienced the physical symptoms of trauma, either with the memory of the event or independent of the memory, and help them move through the freeze response into action. The idea isn't to relive the moment as it actually occurred, but to renegotiate it. Tired of the barrage of images of the boy in his hands, having gone to therapists a total of 4 times, read a bit about trauma, and not really understanding what renegotiating trauma means or how it should be done, I decided I'm qualified enough to try it on my own. Even though no one is at home, I lock the door to my bedroom. I lie down on my bed. I picture myself in class. I'm wearing my cheerleading uniform, but this time I'm also wearing a cape. The boy comes at me from behind, but this time I hear his creepy little footsteps with my bionic hearing. Before he can seize me, restrain me, laugh in my ear, and grope me, before the other boys and teacher just watch and do nothing to stop him, I whirl around, cape slicing through the air, brace my legs one in front of the other, push against his chest with both hands, and with my supersonic voice yell, no. Animated rings spring from my mouth. The boy, the teacher, and the rest of the class are blown back against the wall by my powerful shout. I turn and run to the door, fling it open, run down the hallway, through the main entrance and out the road to the road. I turn and run down the main road, past the beach and the Dairy Queen. I turn at the intersection and race past the grocery store, the playground, and the trailer park. I slow down near the road leading to my house. I want to turn there. I want to feel safe there. I want it to be far enough, but the space between my heart and my throat says not yet. Sorry, Mom and Dad, I say, keep running. I look down, wearing superhero boots. I can run as far as I need. I run all the way through my state. I race through cities and farmland, then turn north, hop across rivers and jump over lakes until I leap the border into Saskatchewan and race into Saskatoon, into the arms of Jeff, Maddie, and Max. They wrap their arms around me and keep their eyes on the horizon while I catch my breath and our cat weaves herself between our legs. Leaning against my family, surrounded and safe, I look back at from where I came. All I see is wide open prairie. I open my eyes. I feel spent, like I have fought and fled. I'm not sure if I did it right, but I feel a little better. I wonder if for it to work, I need to do it for every time it happened. For the next few days, whenever the image of the boy comes to me, whenever I feel him coming up from behind, I fight. Sometimes I push him and run away before he gets to me, but sometimes he gets me first, so I throw him off, spin around and pound him with my fists until he disappears. 2 nights after I first lay down and attempted to renegotiate my trauma, I have the body in the backyard dream. But this time it's not the backyard of my parents' house, it's my backyard. I need to bury a big bag of garbage. I dig a hole by the shed, but it isn't a hole, it's a grave in which I've already buried a body in a green garbage bag. I don't know who's in the bag or how they died, but I know I had something to do with their death and I buried them there. It doesn't look big, it's not a little kid, but it's not an adult either. At first the grave seems shallow, but then it becomes deeper and filled with all sorts of rubbish. Electronics, old toys, shoes. And soon the whole corner of the yard is filled with junk. It's too much for me to handle. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to begin. I start to panic. Then Jeff appears by my side. He takes my hand and says, "We'll bury this bag of garbage in with the body to cover the smell and take the rest of the stuff to the dump." It's a good husband. Then he bends down and picks up an old radio, a Fisher-Price Popper push toy, and a boot. I wake up. For the first time after the body in the backyard dream, I don't feel afraid. I don't feel alone. I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling this new feeling, devoid of racing heart, and I feel something new. I feel my chest expanding wider than usual, my stomach rising and falling without effort. And I think, this must be what it feels like to take a real breath. I breathe deeper to test the edges, find out how far I can go before I feel the python tighten around my wrist. But I never reached that point. The python is gone, and I think, holy shit, it worked.
I want to make sure that I leave time for some questions, so start thinking of questions, but not yet. I have two questions that I want to ask you first. One of them is, how hard was it to begin to talk to other people about this? I mean, obviously, Jeff, you had to talk to, I'm sure. And I don't know about your kids. I would have probably left that for later if that was me. But how was it beginning to talk to the friends and family that you have so clearly, such a huge community of? How did you do it?
I'm a bit of a blurter.
Yeah.
So I don't know. At work, God help the person who was stuck in dispatch with me, because then I'd be like, yeah, I was off work for stress, and that was about, and they were so kind.
Well, you've got an audience there who understand a lot of stuff about stress already.
Yeah,
What about your friends?
yeah, Mariana is very supportive. I didn't tell a lot of people. Yeah, and I didn't, certainly not. Like I said, I'm going through a hard time, I realized a few things. Working on some stuff. Mental health step back. But I didn't go into real details. The worst part was telling people I wrote a book and what I wrote the book about. I was like, just go to my website.
Did you ever, as I do, I think, with your freaking book, think, what did I do that for? I should never have done this.
Well, I'm thinking that right now.
Right. We might be right. We might all be right. No, you're not right. No, it's. Was it hard to tell your childhood family? Isn't the hardest part of it?
Yes. And I think the hardest part wasn't, and I go over it in the book, but the toughest part is if they think it's no big deal, if they react like the teacher, that would have crushed me. That would have been really, really fun.
Yeah, hard too, because, the other reaction is for them to think, well, it's our fault.
Right.
We should have done something, right? We should have known something was happening.
And there's no possible way.
That they could have ever,
No.
because you were very good.
And I didn't even know. I had these changes going on, and I had, like I said, I never once connected them. If anyone had ever asked, Karin, has anything really bad or traumatic happened in your life? I would have said no. No, I could not think of one thing.
Weird.
Weird.
We're so good at coping, and then it
Yeah.
turns out we're not actually very good.
No.
Yeah. It's funny because when I was reading this book, I remember telling you what a brave and useful record it was. Because I already had a list of people who could use this book. I think, me at the top of the list. It's a pretty sad thing that almost everyone I know has some deep scarring that they've been keeping covered for 30 or 40 years. And coping really well and doing our best and not paying much attention to it. And then kablam, then you find that you're telling a therapist all about it without needing to go to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
Okay, so when I reimagined that sort of the scenario when I run back to Saskatchewan, it doesn't end with Jeff and the kids leaving. I needed more people. And so you're correct. And so I brought in more people. I brought in the game, the eating club, and all the kids. I brought in friends over there. I brought in a lot of work. I brought in, and it's not that these were, obviously Mariana was there, and homeschooling friends. And it's not that these were people that I was all particularly close with or connected with on a regular basis. I had, patrol members, the sergeants. And, there's a big crowd growing up, big crowd around me. I had Tamara up in the plane. She was their support at the time. And then I sort of had to laugh because my front line of defense was this whole line of lawn chairs. And it was just filled with all my friends from communications. And they all had margaritas because Joanne had brought her margarita maker. And not because I had them on lawn chairs with margaritas, because I immediately felt sorry for the boy. Because I thought if he comes over that horizon, he does not know what he's gonna face when he faces my friends from communications. They are just he's gonna be important. And it's really unfair. So it's, again, I didn't really tell it. And at that time, I think only Jill knew what was going on with me, but still, everybody in this room was there for me. You're lucky. I'm so lucky. I really am.
But you're also a really good writer. That's the interesting. I was so excited when I read the book that I sent it to my own editor at Knopf, Lynn Henry, because I knew she only works on fiction and I could send it to her without it muddying her water for whatever was going to happen with the book. And she wrote right back. She read it that afternoon and wrote back saying, Karin is an unusually compelling writer. Her sense of her own story and how it fits into the larger story is so sophisticated and intriguing. And that's a big compliment from a big editor, and I think that's very true. And so this is one thing, but it also makes me hope and believe that you're going to keep on writing. So what are you writing now?
Well, right now I still have actually quite a lot more thoughts about this. So I'm writing essays and posting them on my blog. And I really hope to get through all of that by the end of the year. And then I do have a fiction novel that I have all outlined and about 30% written, but I just haven't had the brain space for that. So I'm hoping 2024 to get started on that. And we'll see if I can do fiction.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you how. How was the publishing process? You were so incredibly lucky with this. When you told me that when it was coming out, I just didn't believe it. I thought maybe you got the year wrong. Because usually this is a very, very long process. However, Signature Editions leaked on it, knew what they were getting into and knew how good it was already. Knew that they could push it really fast. So how was that? You worked first of all with Glenda McFarlane, who's a friend of ours. Yeah. And she was sort of an early editor for you. How was that?
It was good. That was actually very encouraging having Glenda. That was actually kind of the highlight of the process, actually having Glenda and you read it and to get Glenda's notes on it saying, she thought it was a good book. She thought it was the art, there was, points at the right spots, which was really satisfying to me. And then, I just felt so lucky that Signature Editions picked up. Because I remember you telling me, I know nothing about publishing. And then I remember you telling me when the Observer was, you had a contract for the Observer, and that was in fall of 2021, you told me. You said it was coming out in fall of 2023. And I'm like, well, that's a long time. So I had no expectation that this would be published this. So I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for Signature.
And it's such a handsome looking book too.
Yeah,
It's a really
they did a very nice job.
How was the finding the title process?
That was tough.
It's horrible. Every time,
It
unless
was
you're
tough.
really lucky. I love the way that it's just a little rubbed off on it. How many titles did you go through?
Lot
7,000.
about
Yes. I want to leave time. I almost forgot to let you guys ask questions. And if you have any questions, I think Lisa's going to go around with the microphone. If anybody, I don't know if you can just shout.
If you want to flag me down, I'll bring the microphone to you.
This is a tough book to ask questions about in a way, because it's sort of, if you were reading it alone, there would be questions you wanted to ask the writer. But here you are right here, and it seems rude to ask you about this personal stuff.
And it's okay if no one has any
And yet
questions.
you did put it out in the world. And the deal is, you will answer.
I will answer anything.
You know what became of shot class boy?
I have very little information. Yeah, I don't know much about him.
If you knew where he was, would you send him the book?
There, I know we have like, Facebook friends in common. So, or I mean, I should say that I know people who are my Facebook friends would know him in where he is. They could always, even if they even put it together that it was him, it would really only be people in the class. No, I wouldn't send it to him.
Send the communications.
I'd send the communications. Yeah. They would make him cry.
They have probably broken all over
No, they wouldn't. do
in
that.
horrible ways. No, okay,
No.
no revenge, that's fine, I guess. If you have another 45 years to work on this, do you have to, or do you think you're pretty close to being?
Oh, no, I don't need another 45 years. You know, there's a few little things, like I still have these kind of neck sort of twitches when I get anxious. Anything that's sort of residual now is really, really minor. I just feel like a brand new person. Like really nothing in my life's changed, but everything is changing. Not a day goes by now where I just don't appreciate not having a panic attack or if something difficult comes up in my life. I just so appreciate that I react differently. I talk about the window of tolerance in the book. It took so little to shoot me out of the window of tolerance. And now I'm just so squarely and firmly in there that just life is so much better. I enjoy life. I'm not enduring it. I'm really feeling all the blessings in my life and feeling connection and feeling that people care about me and that life is so good now. It's such a change. And in 2018, after that first meeting with Val, I didn't know that I didn't think 34 years of trauma could be unraveled in that, in 3-4 years. And it really does.
It's funny because, knowing you for a long time, I would not have said that you were, in real trouble. I mean, I was aware that you struggled with bipolar because you told me so. I wouldn't have thought, oh, Karen's got bipolar. I can see that clearly. But to me too, it's amazing to see the ease that you have now, that I now realize that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same as not, you looking back and not understanding what that incident did to you, looking back and not realizing what you were going through. As you walk around now, do you think about other people and how they're doing? So we wrote a book.
So I wrote a book. Yeah.
Thank you so much. If nobody else has, sorry.
Thank you for hosting. This is we're friends, but this is a real honor having Marina Endicott host this.
It's an honor to talk about this extraordinary book and such, I keep saying brave, but it is very difficult to put yourself out like this and trust that the world will understand you just through the medium of you explaining yourself. And sometimes it's very hard to explain yourself. Yeah, but you do it really well. So thank you very much for coming, and there's time to get Karin to sign a book for you if you haven't already done so. Thanks again, Karin.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I forgot to say that at the beginning. It really means a lot.
I don't think I've seen such a good place for me.
We'll just come and say a quick word. Thank you both for being here tonight. Thank you to Signature Editions, and Karen will be sticking around to sign the books, I believe. We've got copies of Shop Class Hall Pass available just on the desk there. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.